Hello, this is Pam. Today I'm going to be talking about what is the cause of multiple sclerosis. If we have not yet met, my name is Pam Bartha and I am the author of Become a Wellness Champion and the founder of Live Disease Free. And this is a very passionate topic for me because 30 years ago I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I was just 28 years old. And I was given this horrible diagnosis, and I was told that there was nothing that I could do to stop this disease from basically taking my life and for me to become completely disabled in time. Well, I'm happy to share with you that I have been MS-free for the past 30 years. I had that horrible initial attack and symptoms, but I was able to settle that down by really focusing on treating infections. I was so incredibly blessed early on to learn that multiple sclerosis and all chronic disease is caused by infections in the body. And when you treat those infections, the disease process stops and you'll have a ton of recovery. So I think that today, if you have multiple sclerosis or some other neurological disease or maybe autoimmune disease, cancer, please understand I'm talking about infections. And yes, we may have different infections, but this training that I'm going to share with you is going to give you a lot of hope. And I don't just speak from my own personal experience. I have had the amazing privilege to coach over 600 people in their recovery from chronic disease, mostly multiple sclerosis. So we see what's working in the Wellness Champions and we see what doesn't work. And so from that large cohort of people, we've really started to, we have a much deeper understanding of which types of infections are causing multiple sclerosis. So please, if you know people that are searching for answers, just share this video with them, whether it's the replay or invite them to join live. But I just want to get this word out, and you guys can help me get this word out because we have to bring change. We have to have things change because people are suffering terribly. I talk to people every day. Today I was talking to a lady on the phone and she was in tears half of the time I was talking to her, and it breaks my heart. And in order for things to change, the only way we're going to make a change is by us wellness champions getting the word out. So I say that multiple sclerosis is caused by infection. And yes, we know that with diseases, we can also say that nutritional deficiencies can cause disease and toxicity can cause disease. But the vast majority of the symptoms we're dealing with in neurological diseases, autoimmune and cancer, is coming from infections in the body. And I'm going to talk about several different types with respect to research. All right, so this is not just what we're seeing in our students that are recovering, but what is out in the scientific literature. So this is not my opinion that I'm going to be sharing with you. So this is information that I'm going to start with, is information that I didn't know about when I was diagnosed in 1988. I learned about Candida, and I learned from several different doctors that they were treating chronic fungal overgrowth and parasites, but specifically fungus. But even before this, way back in 1911, there are studies that show, and there's at least 20 that I found, and there's a lot more, but all of this you can find on a page that we put on our website, livediseasefree.com, livediseasefree.com. And on that page, if you do /MS-infections, so MS-infections. So on that page, you'll see the links to different studies and the titles of different studies so you can do your own due diligence. And if you have a different disease, then what you can do is you can go onto something like PubMed and you can type in that's a database of studies and research. And you can type in the search bar, you can put your disease, whether it's arthritis or Crohn's or whatever it is, and infection, or your disease label, and chronic infections or dysbiosis. We'll talk a little bit about dysbiosis. And you'll start to see studies coming up linking your condition with infections. And why are we not treating infections? That's a topic for another day. So with respect to the earliest research that I could find with which types of infections are associated with multiple sclerosis, in 1911, they were finding spirochetes, which are like a corkscrew bacteria, in patients with multiple sclerosis. And you'll see study after study after study, like every year or 2 years, there's more studies coming out. Actually, in 1957, Time magazine wrote an article, and where I'm just going to summarize it here for a minute. 1957, multiple sclerosis victims were anxiously wondering about a possible cure for their mysterious disease, which is marked by a near total loss of muscle control. Bacteriologists, so this is a researcher who studies bacteria, reported success in cultivating, so growing in the lab, these spirochetes, which she has found in the spinal fluid of MS patients, victims. And what she believes is that these spirochetes could be the cause of multiple sclerosis. And if they treated the spirochetes, especially early on, that would be able to stop the disease. This was in 1957. I want you guys to engage with me. So if I say something that you love, let me know. If you have a question, type your question in the question box. If you're listening to the replay, please type your comments and your questions in, because we answer them also. This was back in 1957. They were already finding these spirochete bacteria. They didn't know what it was back then, but it was Lyme disease, probably, because that's what they're seeing now, and that's what I'm going to carry on. So again, you'll see on the liveddiseasefree.com/MS-infections page. So it's MS-infections with an S. That page, you'll see all those studies from 1911 all the way up to 1957. There's about 20 of them, over 20 of them. And then, so there are more, but that's just what I've just, trying to pull together for you. Then there's in 2001, and I found this one through Dr. Alan McDonald, who I'll talk about in a few minutes, but he cited this study, 2001 study, where they were actually able to culture or grow Borrelia. Borrelia is Lyme disease, so that is the spiral bacteria. They were able to grow that in the spinal fluid of 10 out of 10 MS patients that I'm sure that they had passed away, because that's what Dr. Alan McDonald studied too, is people that had died of MS. But in every single specimen that they tested, the spinal fluid of people that had died from MS, they found these spirochetes. And in addition, they also looked at using an electron microscope, and they all tested positive for Borrelia. So again, we were starting off with this general understanding of this spirochete, this unknown like corkscrew bacteria, finding it in the spinal fluid and finding it in MS patients. And then, as we're going along, they're learning more about Lyme disease and being able to identify Borrelia. And so then they're like, oh my gosh, it's Borrelia. Well, then I'm going to fast. So there are more studies, I'm sure, but that's what I found. And actually, this last study was pointed out to me from Dr. Alan McDonald. When I was diagnosed with MS, I didn't know about all the spirochete research. I just knew that when I was diagnosed, I got this book, and it was called The Yeast Connection by Dr. William Crook. And that book talked about how Candida, fungal overgrowth in the body, is present in chronic disease. And as you treat it, then you can alleviate symptoms and become symptom-free. So then I also read some other books by Dr. Rona. He's a Canadian medical doctor. And also Dr. DeShepper, I think he's from Europe, and Dr. Truss. And I'm not sure if he's Canadian or on the West Coast or US, but there were at least 4 different books that I read. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. And they were all talking about infection, and yes, treating parasites, but there wasn't a lot of talk about treating parasites like more aggressively, other than just with herbs. So I followed their lead, and I changed my diet, and I started to treat Candida. And I didn't have a coach, and it was hard, because I would just go to the health food store and I'd find out about a new book, and I'd order a book and I'd read it. But the more I focused on treating infection, and I did lots of different things, right? I did parasite cleanses, and I did all kinds of natural, safe things. And some things helped and some didn't. The more that I focused on treating infections, bacterial and parasitic and also fungal, that's what kept me in remission. All right. And so I was super passionate because I was able to, get my health back and my life back. And I was in really rough shape when I was diagnosed with MS. I lost all vision in my left eye. It also developed into tingling and weakness in my legs. I had terrible insomnia and fatigue and headaches. I couldn't take care of my kids. My mom stepped in to help me. And I went from being that type of a person to just, working with researching, trial and error, and to be able to manage those bad microbes down enough. But I didn't know about the Borrelia part. And I did know about parasites. I've always been a slim person, but as I was a young child, I always had stomach aches. And my mom would always try to fatten me up because I was the skinny one. And I grew up on a farm and I was on lots of antibiotics. So many of you can relate to that. So I learned about the Candida. And then as I got well and became symptom-free, then I was just so passionate about helping other people recover. So I got a science degree and I became a teacher in our local school district, but my heart and my passion was to help others in wellness. So I thought, well, I'll go and be an integrative doctor. And then I thought, no, after the science degree, that was hard enough on my family. I'm just going to, be a teacher. So my education and teaching really helped me to develop a program. And it's a 90-day program, and we've had over 600 people taking this, and it's evolved, right? As we're learning more and more about the infections that are causing MS. So since that time, I studied under Dr. Klinghardt, under several doctors, but Dr. Klinghardt is an amazing doctor. And he really helped me to understand the Lyme part, the Lyme disease component. So Lyme is not just Borrelia, but it's a collection of infections that travel together, and we get them through different biting insects. Most people have been infected with these critters, but the problem is that when we are really out of balance in our body, we have this dysbiosis. So for me, it was, now in hindsight, I had a lot of parasites right as a child, and fungal overgrowth, and all these things, they suppress your immune system. Your immune system is working to try to keep them under control. And then when we get bitten by a tick or a mosquito or a horsefly or some other biting insect, it can even be the fleas on a cat or on a different pet, then we end up getting infected with them, and our immune system just does not clear them, does not deal with them like they should, like 75% of the population does. We can't avoid all these microbes. They're out there. But what we have to do, thank you for all the love, I really appreciate it. So what we have to do is we have to really focus on managing them. We have to really, and this is a new art and a new skill that I teach people how to do. So with Dr. Klinghardt, I learned a lot about Lyme disease. I've taken several of his courses, and he's a genius. He's helped a lot of people recover from neurological diseases, and he is more training practitioners right now. But he also talks about parasites a lot more too, and really talking about how, sometimes the herbs are not enough to treat the parasites, and we've learned that. We've learned that tremendously, but it's hard because if you can't find practitioners that are able to test you for the parasites, because the stool tests come back false negative, and they are not educated and they're not comfortable using antiparasitic treatments, they kind of go like, okay, we've tested you for parasites. It looks like you don't have parasites. So see you later. But you know in your heart that you probably do. And that is the biggest problem we're facing right now. And that's what we're working really hard at, is that with our students, building a network of practitioners, sharing with them what's working, what we're doing, which treatments, which protocols, how to figure out which treatment protocols, etc. So through Dr. Klinghardt, I learned a lot about Lyme. And then also in our students, like we have this infection survey where they're checking off all their symptoms. And I can tell you that the vast majority of people with neurological diseases, so this is not just MS, it's ALS, it's PLS, it's Parkinson's, it's MS, all of these horrible neurological diseases and others, common thing they have are a lot of symptoms of fungal overgrowth. They have a lot of symptoms of those vector-borne infections. So there is Borrelia, there's Babesia, there's Ehrlichia, there's Rickettsia, there's a number of them that travel together. And so some of them will have more symptoms of some and less of others. So those are kind of like bacterial and very small parasites, etc. And then we have these symptoms of parasites. So now I'm going to step into the last piece, the most recent piece that we learned. And then a connecting piece that we're just learning now. It's kind of like understanding it before, but as you work with all these people, you really start to see like these connections that you don't just see in a lab or you don't just learn in school. So Dr. Alan McDonald published, let me step back a little bit. We had a student from Europe, I should say, from Europe. And she, back in the day when she joined, she was a medical student and she had multiple sclerosis. And she checked her blood and she found nematodes in her blood, little tiny worms in her blood. And she took pictures of them, and I have pictures of them, but I wasn't allowed to publish them, and I'm not going to until I get her okay, because she wants to publish her research. But so I have these pictures of small nematode worms that she found in her blood and also in the blood of another MS patient. So she told me that she went to a conference where Dr. Alan McDonald was speaking. And Dr. Alan McDonald is a pathologist from the United States. He's an incredibly brilliant man, has a heart of gold. And he was doing a lot of research about finding Borrelia, Lyme disease, in the brain and in the central nervous system of people with different types of disease, especially with Alzheimer's disease. And he's got some really great research videos on YouTube and on Vimeo. So make sure if you have family members that have any, dementia and Alzheimer's, to watch those. It's so, he's been talking about this since the 1980s, and it's still not part of our standard of care, and it's not getting the attention it should, which is so unfortunate. So she went to one of his lectures. So this student of mine went to one of his lectures, and I think it was around 2014. And she went up to him after and she said, could you please check the spinal fluid, the central nervous system of people that have died of MS, like from brain bank specimens, etc., to see if there are these little worms inside the brains and spinal fluid of MS patients. And so he did. And he has a website, and he found he had 10 out of 10. And I should say too that another thing that he shares on his video is that there was a person that a lady, her husband died of, I think it was MS. And so she asked him to look at his central nervous system to see if he had Borrelia in his central nervous system. He did, and he found not only Borrelia, which is Lyme disease, the spirochetes, but he also found many little worms, the nematodes. So that's a really huge finding. So from that one, he looked at 9 other specimens, and in every single specimen that he looked at, especially the spinal fluid, there were more in the spinal fluid than in the brain, tons of these little nematode worms. Now, the really significant part of this, there's several, but a really significant part of this is that these little worms, when they are present in the central nervous system of domestic animals, so that would be goats and sheep and cattle and dogs and cats and horses, etc., when these little worms get into the central nervous system of these animals, they have symptoms identical to multiple sclerosis. They have terrible, terrible fatigue. They get balance issues, they have numbness, they have paralysis, they have weakness in their legs, they have drop foot, they have all of the blindness. It is shocking how many similar symptoms they have. You can imagine little worms in your central nervous system, right? They can cause a lot of damage. So this is huge, and I hope you guys help me get the word out, whether you share this video, whether you find Dr. Alan McDonald on Vimeo and you share that video. Let's get it out because it is so profound. So, and another significant thing that he found is that inside these little nematodes, so we get bitten by not just ticks, but mosquitoes and any biting insect. They carry not just Lyme disease, but they carry these little worms. And so we get infected with these little worms in our blood. And they can make their way and cross the blood-brain barrier. And they carry Borrelia inside of them. They carry Lyme disease. So he was able to test, and he was able to see that, and you can see in his research that they found Lyme DNA in every single little nematode that they found. So what they would do is they use this special technique where they use this dye, which is attracted to the DNA, to specific DNA, so DNA of Borrelia. And you can just see in these little worms that it just lights up green inside of them. So these little worms are going into our central nervous system. They are, when they deposit their waste, they are depositing Borrelia inside of our spinal fluid and our brain. And that's how we're becoming even more infected than just a Borrelia finding its way into our central nervous system, because this is a symbiotic relationship between the worm and the Lyme. They kind of, in some cases, they need each other, and others they don't. I'm not sure if they really need each other, possibly. I'm going to share some more information with you in a minute. But so the key is that we don't just have the worms, the nematodes in our, and they're called microfilarial worms. We have them present in the central nervous system very often, but we also have the Lyme brought in. And we also have fungal overgrowth, and I'm just going to touch on that. So fungus, we've known for years that it's a huge problem in all chronic disease. It must be treated, absolutely. But what we're seeing in our students in the research is that, is it the biggest cause? I don't think so. I used to think Candida had a much bigger role. It has to be treated, no question about that. So the key is that these little nematodes plus Lyme are a big factor. Now, I just want to say one other thing before I forget, is that I've shared research on very recent videos where they're also finding that if we have a tapeworm inside of us, maybe in our digestive tract, and it produces eggs and they hatch. And so the little immature forms are called larvae or larvae, and they migrate into different parts of the body. And wherever they land, we can end up with a cyst, or we can end up with a tumor type thing. And they can also cross the blood-brain barrier. And there's been research showing where, you know, one lady in particular, that was just a case study, but she had these relapsing, remitting symptoms, very similar to multiple sclerosis, but it was because they found this larva, the immature form of the tapeworm, which caused a lesion in her central nervous system. So these lesions are pockets of infection. They're not always the same, caused by the same infection. That's the big problem, but I don't think there's that many options. I think that parasites are a really, really big problem, treating Lyme disease, knocking back fungus. So it's not impossible to do. We've got so many amazing cues and information from these wonderful, wonderful practitioners and researchers. So the last little piece that I wanted to share with you is that what I'm seeing in the students, and then there's work of Dr. Simon Yu. He's just a pioneer in really treating parasites aggressively. So we've learned a lot about protocols from him, like he does classes to teach practitioners. He invited me just this last spring, and that's a huge privilege because he only invites doctors that can prescribe, and I was invited for the work that I do. So we really understand, number one, that MS is largely a parasitic infestation, for sure. And what we're seeing in our students, it's not just those little microfilarial worms in the central nervous system, but our students are infested with parasites. And that's probably why they're susceptible to having infections moving into their central nervous system. So our students have passed, go back and watch some of my videos on Live Disease Free YouTube channel and Live Disease Free Facebook. There's replays, there's a 5-part series on MS and infections, and I've shared some pictures of worms. Like, some of our students are passing anywhere between 6 inches to over 2-foot long worms. And although they may not be causing all of their neurological symptoms, they feel so much better when they get them out. I'm always asking, like, okay, great, you got it out, but are you noticing a change? Are you feeling any better? And they always say yes, like it's shocking. It's an instant thing when they pass them. So the thing that I want you to really grasp, the concept that I really want you to grasp, is that Several I do, and I'll talk more about all of them in a minute. But one in particular is that, okay, I've shared this relationship between the worms and the little bacteria. So very often in nature, there's these relationships, mutually beneficial relationships. So I have also been doing some research, and they're finding that with these small microfilarial worms, if they live in one part of you, let's say if they live in your lymphatic system, you could have this elephantitis disease. If they live in another area in your eyes, you could get river blindness. So there's different types of worms that like to live in different areas. And so the key is to understand that what they're starting to say, what I'm starting to see in some of the research, is that just treating the worm by itself isn't really 100% effective, because the drugs have their limitations. They're very well tolerated, the antiparasitic drugs. They work a lot better than the herbs. That's what we're finding. But sometimes they treat the adults, and sometimes they treat the immature forms. Sometimes they don't cross the blood-brain barrier as well, so they're not going to treat the infections in the central nervous system. Sometimes they just work in our gut and they don't even treat systemically. So this is all of the challenge we're dealing with, is how do we get a concentrated, enough concentration to the part of the body that's infected, and for long enough. And then we have to remember that we've been infected for years, so there's lots and lots of eggs that hatch in several months, so we've got to do enough cycles. And so the key is that some of this research, they're saying that instead of just treating the worms, treat the bacteria that the worms need to live off of. So that's really interesting. So when you do the two together, they're having more success at clearing these parasitic worms. So the key is that it may not be all that our neurological symptoms are caused by Lyme, and it may not, and we don't know for sure. I'm assuming that the little worms are a huge part of it, because with our students, as they are treating the nematodes, that's where they're noticing, especially the people that have not had it as long, that it's easier to treat. And we're seeing antiparasitic drugs are really changing people's lives, as far as no longer using a walker, being able to go back to work, being able to drive, etc. But if you've had it for a longer time, you may have more infection in your central nervous system, and you've got that play between the worms and the bacteria and the fungus, etc. So how do we get that out? So we use strategy as far as the number one, treating the worms, but also treating the bacteria. So some of the research I was seeing is that with some of these microfilarial worms, that there's this symbiotic relationship between the little worm and rickettsia, which is one of the other vector-borne infections associated with. So vector-borne means a biting insect. And so the more proper term for Lyme disease is a vector-borne infection associated with Lyme disease. So there's multiple microbes that travel together when you're bitten by a tick or a mosquito that can cause a problem. So this is what we do in the program, and it's it takes strategy to recover, especially the farther along we are with chronic disease. Early intervention is always the best, because you're treating the infections before they're as populated deeper in your body, and also not having as much of different varieties of infections to deal with. So that's what we do. So what I wanted to just share with you are things that I've learned. So I want to make sure I covered everything. I think I did. So again, fungus, we do treat it. It's definitely something we need to. I used to always think that fungus was the biggest problem, but it definitely suppresses our immune system. But we're seeing like shockingly quicker improvements by also incorporating treating parasites. So what we're doing is we're hitting parasites for at least 14 days, stop, treat the fungus for at least 14 days, stop, take a break, allow things to hatch. And now what we're going to start doing is really starting to treat, especially for people that have a lot of the vector-borne infection symptoms alongside, is using herbs and maybe liposomal herbal preparations that are working with the drugs and not interacting negatively with them, but to try to, but this is the thing, is you got to work with somebody, because you can't kill these things off too quickly or you'll feel horrible. And like Dr. Alan McDonald warned, he said, if you kill off these nematodes too quickly in the central nervous system, you could go into shock, you could get seizures, and it could be really brutal. And we haven't had that, but it's really important to work with somebody and to work in a very systematic way and treat yourself with somebody who has experience and doing it in a safe manner. All right, so the lessons that we've learned so far, and like I said, things are evolving and we are learning and learning I would say every few months we're getting some incredibly deeper insights into all of this. So number one, I just wanted to share that we know that MS is caused by infection in the body, chronic silent infections, and it's really a state of dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means you're out of balance. So with my students, they're passing really big worms. They can have tapeworms. They can have all kinds of roundworms. They can have whipworms. They can have threadworms. Yes, they more than likely, people with neurological diseases will have little parasites that have moved into the central nervous system. They all have fungal overgrowth. That's just common, but it's not just candida. It can also be things like aspergillus and mold and many others. There's hundreds of species of different fungi that can make us sick. And then we also have these vector-borne infections associated with Lyme. And so some people will show more symptoms of Borrelia, and some people will show with MS, Babesia is a really big one also. And so this is why we have to understand that it's a collection of infections. It's not just, and that's why we haven't been able to come up with a cure. The only way we can come up with a cure is really in, I'll tell you the steps that we do in a minute here, but we have to understand we're dealing with layers of infection and working them down and building back up our natural defense. And so I talked about, again, big and small parasites and Lyme disease and fungus and this symbiotic relationship that we also want to sever, right? If you can get rid of the bacteria that maybe adults require to live, then the adults can't live anymore. And again, I just want to stress that the treatments, it takes strategy because there are limitations with the drug treatments, even though they are more helpful than just the herbs, especially for advanced disease where we have a higher amount of infection deeper in the body. So we're finding that the drug treatments for treating parasites and treating fungus, especially the parasites, the fungus, I'm still not totally sure because the herbs work quite well for that. And Lyme, I still believe that I still like the herbs for that. So they're smaller critters, right? Fungus and Borrelia and Babesia, all of those are a lot smaller. And so the success of the students is really coming from layering the treatments where we are not only just using, expecting the drugs to treat and kill the infections, but using oxidizing therapies and using herbs in conjunction with it, and maybe using a little light therapy and electromedicine. So using strategy as to the location. And when we do that, using a holistic approach, and the big thing is that before we even start treating, we have to stop feeding the infections. That is so important. The eating plan is so powerful. I was just interviewing one of our grads from our Wellness Champion grads, Laura Lee, and I'm going to be putting up her success on our Live Disease-Free testimony page. Make sure you guys go and watch them. It'll bring tears to your eyes when you hear from people like Terry Kiley, who was able to walk again after 7 years of being diagnosed with MS and not walking for 7 years and using a scooter, and Maria sharing too how she came out of her wheelchair. I can never promise full recovery, but what I can say to you is that when you take the right steps and you're diligent with excellence, miracles can happen. You for sure will stop the progression and you will have a lot of success, and it's usually a lot more than you thought possible. So the key is that we have to stop feeding them, we have to support the body, and then we start to look at the game plan. How are we going to treat them? And it is just super exciting what we've learned. And I really hope that with the help of the Wellness Champions, because I can't do this by myself, but with the help of the Wellness Champions, just getting the word out and the message out and building this network of practitioners, that we can bring change a lot quicker than one single person can do. So the successes, again, if you want to read up on some of the possibilities for you, go to livediseasefree.com and you'll see the successes just going through on the page there, and you can just pick some of them, and some of them are audio and video. And it's so exciting to hear their voice and to hear it coming from their voice, the possibilities and what happened in their life. So I'm just going to go to your questions for a minute. So there are 45 comments, probably lots of highs and hellos. Okay, hi Mike. Thank you for sharing, Mike. And so where is he located? Marie, I'm not sure who you're asking. Maybe you had another question. I'll look up. Gorette. So Dr. Bernard, I don't know of him. I can't recommend. Somebody is mentioning a doctor's name, but the key is that there are probably thousands, because we work globally. We have students from over 15 countries, and there are so many well-meaning practitioners that really want to help us, but this is so new, the treating parasites effectively. I was just speaking with a lady today in Australia, actually, and she's just suffering terribly. She's in a wheelchair, and she was working with an integrative practitioner who actually treated her for parasites, but he just didn't use the right treatment protocols. He did 1 day of one treatment, and so the key is, number one, you can't just go to treatment because you're not going to get success. You have to first stop feeding them, support the body, and then use proper and really understanding which symptoms you have. All right. Ruben, you lost volume there. The treatment, sorry. There is a replay so you can listen to it. And Garrett. So the key is that there are Lyme doctors, for sure, there are. They're called Lyme literate doctors. And I have students coming to me that have worked with the Lyme literate doctors. Most of them are treating with a lot of antibiotics, and they don't understand the whole parasite connection. So the key is that, yeah, you guys can relate to that. So there are people that come to me and they've been treated and treated for several years with Lyme literate doctors, and they're sicker than ever. So the key is that what I believe is that you should learn these skills yourself. It's not hard. You know it for life. You know how to manage these microbes for the rest of your life. You'll know how to get back into balance. You can do most of the work yourself. And so I don't really like the use of the antibiotics. I have not, and I've interviewed lots of people. Remember that Lyme is very common with all the neurological diseases. It's one of the infections that's pretty much always present. And we just have not seen long-term success with using antibiotics. The microbes become resistant to it. A lot of them cannot get into when we have been bitten by let's say a tick or a mosquito. And if you're treated like right away with antibiotics, like right when it happens, you can have success. But very soon after you've been bitten, these critters, they move into your lymphatic system, they move into your tissue, they move under biofilms, and the antibiotics can't reach those areas. And then also, like I said, the resistance is a really big problem. So the key is that before seeking out a Lyme literate doctor, I personally would check out more of what I share and learn how to treat parasites, treat fungus, get that down a lot. Like Dr. Klinghardt would say, most of his Lyme patients, it's a parasite problem. Really important to know. I know people that have been tested, they test positive for Bartonella and for Borrelia, etc., but they have no symptoms because they've managed to get all those other microbes down. And yes, you're going to still be exposed to these microbes. That's the exciting thing, is that you don't have to hide in a bubble. You can live your life. And when you're exposed, if your microbiome in your gut, your intestines are in balance enough, and you've decreased the burden in your body of different bad microbes, then your immune system can handle it. And that is the key, and that's what we help people to do. Hi, Anne. Hi, LaDonna. Hi, Susan. Can you please share exactly what tests we should have to check for parasites, fungus, and bacteria? Unfortunately, Susan, there are no good tests. So what our students are doing is they're getting their hands on the most commonly used anti-parasitic and antifungal treatments. If they want, they are going to a practitioner that can do some type of energy testing. There's EAV, there is Vega testing, there is AMA, there's ART testing, there's a whole bunch, there's muscle testing, there's a lot of different types of energy testing. That's really the only way that we can tell which treatments are most helpful for you. So we're not able to tell which parasites people have. You're more than welcome to have a stool test done with your practitioner, let's say with a GP, but you will find other than picking up something like Blastocystis hominis or Giardia or some common little single cell protozoal type parasite, they just don't pick them up. They don't. And they're not going to pick up the parasites in your spinal fluid. They're not going to pick up the parasites in your blood or the ones that are throughout your body. So that's the dilemma, Susan, is that we don't have good tests, but we don't have to wait. Because like I said, through the Live Disease Free Academy that we have, we help people to do most of the work themselves. It's so much more cost effective. Some of these clinics, they can be good, but they can be $30,000 to $80,000 for up to 3 months of treatment of infections. Can you get a relapse after? Yes, because you didn't learn how to manage them yourself. And that is the key, is that this is a skill that we should be teaching in schools, how to manage the microbes that live in our body. So unfortunately, at this time, we don't have good tests, but I will let everyone know if and when we ever do. Again, the frustrating and difficult part is that even with respect to multiple sclerosis, we don't all have exactly the same parasites at exactly the same populations in exactly the same location. And so we're seeing that some students can get better on 2 antiparasitic treatments and hitting the fungus for sure. And they usually have to knock back the Lyme, but it's a lot easier to treat Lyme when you've got the parasites and fungus down. And then other people will need 3 to 5 antiparasitic treatments, so it really varies. And we see with different diseases, like one of our students with PLS right now, she's having incredible, so that's a slower progressing form of ALS, and she's doing the similar things to what people with MS have. So this is the hard part, is that you need somebody to help you. You can't treat this on your own, and finding practitioners that understand this at this time, it is really frustrating, it's really difficult. And you'll go to an integrated practitioner and they really want to help, they really mean well, but you'll be doing all these different things that cost a fortune and you're not getting better unless they literally are talking like how I'm talking. And that is not enough of them yet. They're out there, but they're difficult to find. Hi, Sweetie. Hi, Adrienne. Hi, Bonnie. The doctor was thinking you had Lyme, but it is MS. Just be aware, Bonnie, that Lyme is one of the infections that is usually present and causing MS symptoms, all right? So whether the Lyme is just weakening your immune system, but we do know with Lyme disease, if you look at people with full-blown Lyme, they have lots of terrible neurological symptoms for sure. So it is one of the infections that goes. MS is just a label for infections that cause neurological symptoms, all right? They don't know what MS is, but they call it MS, so they say, okay, we'll give you these drugs, or we'll offer you these drugs. And with Laura Lee that I was talking with today, it was like, okay, you've been, back when she was diagnosed with MS, you've been diagnosed with MS, here's a list of drugs you pick. And she's like, how am I supposed to pick? I'm not a doctor, how do I know which one is good or not? But that's what they're doing. It's just trial and error, which is awful because they're really toxic. They have a lot of adverse effects. And they don't treat infection. They are suppressing the immune system. How can I find a doctor who will treat us? So Marie-Anne, if you are really serious about this, watch my masterclass training, reach out to me, and that's what we help you to do. Otherwise, you just literally have to listen to a bunch of my training videos and you'll kind of have a general understanding of what we're talking about, and then try to find a doctor that talks like us. But honestly, we are having more success than anyone I know with respect to treating MS because of what we're doing. I am not aware of any program in the world like this. And we are, but what I would do is I would help you if you want to do this. I would help you to find someone in your area if you want to be energy tested to see which of the treatments are most helpful for you. And then that practitioner, so this is what we're doing, is we're building up a network of practitioners that understand this, but it really comes through not trial and error, it comes through working and helping people recover, helping more and more people recover. And then you see, oh my gosh, this helped this person, but this also helped this person. And you start to see all the connections because it's not a one-size-fits-all protocol to recover, unfortunately. It's similar big steps, but it's individualized with respect to the treatments. Ruben, is there a treatment for this? Yes, there is. Watch my masterclass training It is how to recover from multiple sclerosis naturally. Hi, Marissa. Hi, Sophia. Sophia is the name of my granddaughter. She's about 7 weeks old, and she is just a ball of love, starting to smile. I'm just so incredibly blessed. So do you think Lyme disease can cause multiple sclerosis? I don't believe that it's just Borrelia that's causing multiple sclerosis. If you think about, Mike, those little nematodes, those little tiny worms in the spinal fluid and the brain of MS, you just think about it. And that's another reason, like, what you eat is so important. What you drink is so important. If you need caffeine to get you going, to get you all energized, what do you think the caffeine is doing to the parasites inside of you? You don't want to energize them because they're going to cause more damage, right? And then also, when it was really neat, because when I was interviewing Laura, she had so many words of wisdom. She was saying, like, once I really understood the parasites, and then I understood, like, if I eat sugar, it's just feeding them so much, and they're becoming so much more active and stronger and reproducing, and it's making me disabled. And that's why when I eat sugar, when I eat a lot of carbs, my symptoms are worse. That was at the very start. So this is very empowering. And that's why, you know, for all of you that are listening, if this is the first time you've met me, watch my trainings. I've got videos on what I eat. Start to implement things, and you'll start to see improvements. And then when you're ready, you're like, oh my gosh, Pam, I've tried all kinds of things. I've cleaned up my diet. I've gone low carb. I've been doing stem cell and CCSVI and all these other things. If you're at that place and you're like, I need a plan, I need a step-by-step plan, that's what I share with you. So the training talks about all of the infections, and I talk about the steps we use to recover. There's a ton of case studies of improvements and reports of people that have recovered. You can go on our website too, livediseasefree.com. It's all there for you. There's lots there for you. There's no excuse. And I'm bringing this research to you so that you truly understand there is hope for you. There is an answer. It is just your body is infested with infections. A lot of parasites, the Lyme infections, and fungus, and they have to be treated, and then you will have a lot of recovery. The disease process will stop. People are able to come off their meds by working with their doctors. It is a much better plan. Okay, last couple of questions here. Hello, Susan and Sally. And so Sal, there are a few different doctors that I study under. So there's Dr. Klinger, there's Dr. Yu, there's a whole bunch of different practitioners, and they all have different pieces of the puzzle, right? But if you want to recover from neurological diseases, we have had like hundreds of people go through our program. And so it's like taking the best of multiple people together. All right, so watch my masterclass training. All right, I think that's it for the questions. There is a replay. You will see this replay, Ruben. It will be on Live Disease Free YouTube channel. So if you go onto YouTube and find Live Disease Free, make sure to subscribe if you want more trainings, if you like what you learn, and also Live Disease Free on Facebook. That's where you guys are here right now. There will be a replay. You'll see it just in the feed, or you'll see it under videos on the side. Hello, Teresa. Hi, Lori Ann. You were on Copaxone for years, and a few months ago you took yourself off. You truly felt that it wasn't helping you. Absolutely. The Cochrane Library has done 2 independent reviews of all of the studies, the well-done studies on Copaxone over the past 20 years, and they have found that there is no statistical difference between people that take Copaxone and the ones that don't with respect to progression to disability. So I bet you're happy you're not having to inject yourself every day or a few times a week. And the problem is that it is toxic to every part of our body, and it's been shown that it is not slowing down the progression to disability. And then you wonder, why are we still using it? I don't know if the doctors are getting that memo. I don't think they've read that research. And also, I'm not going to get into the rest of it because, yes, I'm going to keep it very compliant here. You're so very welcome, Bonnie. I'm going to just finish up the last. You are so very welcome. Adesto, nice name. You're concerned about what happens when you start antiparasitic drugs. Is there a lot of die-off? Again, you have to work with somebody. You can't mess around on your own. So what we do in the program is stop feeding the infection. So they're a little less active, you start feeling better. Then you support your body, you build yourself up. You have to be having daily bowel movements, you have to be sleeping well, you have to make sure you don't have mold in the environment, you decrease your radiation, a whole bunch of different things. Then we also look at your symptoms, and it helps to see, like, what are you dealing with? And it's important because we don't have good tests, and so that you can see, like, oh my gosh, it's not just Pam saying that, but I have 15 symptoms of parasites, or I've got all these symptoms of Lyme and all these symptoms of fungus. And so we know whether somebody is really sick and sensitive to things and they have to go slower, or whether somebody is stronger and they can handle more. But you're right, it is like an incrementation of, we don't just put people on 5 drugs and they just start the program, they're on the drugs. That would not be wise or smart, and you can definitely run into problems. So we know what works, we know how to move forward in a very safe manner. Again, we're working with doctors, practitioners that are prescribing, and we're watching blood work to make sure, and they're really well tolerated. Usually they're tolerated better. The antiparasitic drugs are usually tolerated better than the herbs. And for really more advanced chronic neurological diseases, they help to treat quicker if you're using the right combination of them, for sure. No, we haven't had anyone with life-threatening reactions to it at all. But again, you have to know what you're doing. You have to, I've used a lot of these antiparasitic drugs. I still, even though I'm MS-free, I was treating parasites because of, number one, still believed I had parasites. And number two, I like to know what they're like, etc. So treating them, I have passed worms and significant numbers of worms, and the more you pass, this is something that we should be doing at least once a year. We should be treating parasites. That prevents chronic disease, and knocking back fungus once a year at least, that prevents chronic disease. So that's the key, is to and keep building up the good microbes. So we're not just knocking back the bad, but build up the good with the raw sauerkraut, for example. That is the best to start with. But if you're really sick, you start with small amounts because it might be too much for you. You don't have to live near me, Maureen. I coach people all over the world. Hi, Stephanie. Do I have to have a special spinal tap to determine you have MS? No. Usually, if you have symptoms, so there was one lady I was talking to today, she is in a wheelchair, she has a lot of MS symptoms, but she doesn't have any lesions. So that's the frustrating thing, is that you can have an MRI done, and that's what they do a lot of times. And then they will also have you, like the neurologist will do some different tests on your muscles and your reflexes and things like that in the office. But again, there are people that I work with that have many symptoms of MS, but they don't have the lesions in the MRI. And so they don't get it, they don't have a diagnosis of MS, but they're like, I know it's infection, I want to treat it, I'm not dealing, this is too dangerous. And then there's people that have a lot of lesions and they have MS, and people that become symptom-free can still have lesions. There are people that have autism that have lesions. There's people that have Crohn's disease that have lesions. Stephanie, if you're having neurological symptoms associated with neurological diseases, just assume that it's parasites, probably Lyme disease and fungus, and you have to work with someone and treat it. The earlier you treat it, the easier, it still works, but the easier it is to treat, for sure. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. I think that was it. So Ruben, the replay, my masterclass training, it is going to be in the feed of this call, or this training that I just did right now. You'll see it above and you'll see it in the feed, and you'll be able to watch it. And then if you're at the place where you really want a step-by-step plan, you'll be able to reach out to me and you can become a wellness champion this week. So with that, I'm going to let you guys go. And next week, I'm going to be talking about why is it that people that suffer with MS are so sensitive to heat. And is there any hope? Maybe you love the sunshine. Maybe you love to lay at the beach and be outside with your family and your friends, but you don't tolerate the heat. Is there any hope for you? Yes, there is. And I'll talk about it next week. Same place, 5 o'clock Pacific on Wednesday. Take care and bye-bye for now.